The world's population is getting older, and the implications for you as a pensioner or an investor are profound. By 2050, 2.1 billion people will be over 60, and more than 400 million will be over 80. How will pension systems cope? Fidelity International has commissioned new research to tell our clients what they need to know and what they can do about it. And here to give us an overview of the economics of longevity and the hurdles ahead is our global head of macro and strategic asset allocation, Salman Ahmed. Welcome, Salman.
Thank you.
Let's start with the big picture. It's always a good place to start. What are the most significant challenges that face Western societies when it comes to longevity? At its heart, is this a fiscal problem?
So I think it's a multidimensional problem, and we are at an inflection point in 2023. For the first time in human history, fertility rates dropped below replacement rate. So that means that we are entering the zone where globally, as a whole, population will stagnate, and then you have obviously the aging population dynamic going on.
Many more older people, less younger people. There's a lot of support then that needs to shift. I mean, can the system adjust to this new dynamic?
Just to give you some sense of the numbers, in Europe, for example, by 2030, we are going to get another 3.4 million decline in the working age population. Already since 2002, the share of over 60s has increased by 28 million. So this number is going to go towards a more exponential path. And then on top of that, immigration is slowing down across the world, and that has been a very important. From economics perspective, has been a very important force in terms of keeping population growth intact, keeping that working age share, especially of prime age between 15 and 60, at a suitable level. Most of the growth in the US and Europe, more so over the last 15, 20 years, has been immigration driven. So now that trend is changing, we also have to think about how will the systems, as you were sharing, cope? And this is, of course, has implications on pensions, consumption patterns, but also the role of technology, I think, and AI, which is obviously becoming a very important dynamic in itself, which may have long-term horizon impact.
Let's come to technology in a bit, because it is, as you say, potentially going to have a huge impact. Thinking about how societies might try to afford these changes, you mentioned immigration already. I suppose one of the other options, most immediately perhaps, is to just stop people from retiring too early. But how far does that retirement age need to move? I mean, are projections, do you think, enough at the moment?
So the current, limits are not set for what lies ahead, for sure. When you have median age in a lot of countries, advanced countries, reaching 40, and in some cases even reaching 50, you have to think about retirement age limits. And also, people are not only living longer, but they are living healthier lives. They are more productive compared to our previous generations. In terms of the projections going forward, of course, 60, 65 is no longer a dream now. But there will be social and political pressure against that, and we are seeing that, for example, in France, very significant pressure against that kind of policy move. But it is unsustainable that you have basically retirement happening at 60, 65, and then people going on to live for another 20, 25 years, and then, consuming in a consumption mode rather than also in a productive mode. So that balance will have to change. And we do think that as this dynamic becomes more clearer, aging becomes much more obvious, retirement ages will start to go up across the advanced economy world.
So raising retirement age, one option, clearly not the only one. You've mentioned immigration. Higher birth rates seem to be, at least for the time being, not a possibility. Are there any useful examples that you can think of where we've seen economies sort of pull these various levers to help balance some of those challenges?
I think one of the extreme cases has been Japan. Working age population in Japan peaked in 1995. Population peaked in 2008 itself. they are already going toward through a declining working age population and increase in elderly population, so above share of population above 65. They have used one lever, which is basically increasing women participation rates, and that has been quite successful. Even though in level terms it's still quite different in the sense like 50% of women are now participating in the labor force in Japan versus 80% for men. But this number used to be very, very low. But you can get a big, shock, positive shock from more gender-based participation. Immigration they haven't used, and to be fair with you, I would say the rest of the advanced world has been using immigration to kick the can down the road. But there are social, political, and other issues which come through that, and we are living through that in a day-to-day basis. But immigration, both in Europe and US, has been quite critical in terms of getting that balance of working age population intact, and then able to afford this pay-as-you-go system. Most of the economies are running.
Let's think a little bit more about sort of labour supply and what happens when you have a shrinking workforce. What does it do to an economy when there aren't enough workers?
This is one of those dynamics and trends which have both demand and supply implications. So the supply side you already touched upon. So you have less working age population, less productive resource at your disposal, and then a shift away towards consumption, and a very different kind of consumption. So there is a life cycle model at play. So and you have basically drawdown of savings happening to finance that consumption. At a macro level, that can have serious implications on the balance between savings and investment. And savings and investments are critical if you want to keep growing your productivity and improve those life standards. So that basically means that at a macro level, focus on specific parts of consumption becomes much more heavier than the supply. So it's a negative supply shock, but at the same time, a positive demand shock for certain areas of the consumption basket. Now, there's been a lot of debate about whether this, that leads to more inflation or not. And Japan example has been an interesting one where we saw deflation. So the supply side dominated the demand side factors. But I think what is different between the example of Japan and the rest, and the one we are going to experience at a global level going forward, is that Japan aging was happening in an isolation. Whilst when you have global aging, especially across the DM world, that may change the demand side as well. So we are in the camp that inflationary impulse may become important here, especially if retirement age is not increased, and you have a big influx of retirees coming through, and then you have obviously longevity there, and then some parts of the consumption basket means that you have more demand. So that adds to our inflation story, although it may not be the only one. It's a more slower moving shock, but it adds to that inflationary impulse into the system.
Before we go a little bit more into that, I just wondered if you could paint a bit of a picture of how you see consumption trends changing generally over time with these older populations.
So the first one would be a lower share of buying of houses, for example, because you already settle and at that stage of your life more generally. So less consumption of durable goods associated with as you're setting up families, and household formation comes into play. So it's a different consumption basket, and we've also seen for example, the example of Japan, that the consumption basket effects can be quite significant. You have other dynamics which take hold because of not only because of aging population, but also the contraction in the population. So empty housing, excess capacity, which starts to show up. Well, those are slower moving trends, but they can be very powerful when they start appearing in a country.
Let's go back to technology. It's definitely the topic front of everyone's mind at the moment. Could advances in AI and the automation that's sort of currently being promised from various sectors offset that drag from shrinking workforces, do you believe?
This is, I think, probably the multi-trillion-dollar question right now. $500 billion of capex is happening in the hope that per year in the US by a few names, as we know, in the hope that AI can change the world. I think it's to make precise estimates is too early. It's a very new technology, but we can see it's a powerful technology. Once you use it, and you can see the use cases starting to appear. Automation for me is a probably more important one because that's where you will directly replace physical labor. And services were always capital heavy. They were not that labor intensive. Manufacturing is labor intensive, relatively speaking. And that's where immigration, for example, has been playing a big role in plugging that labor scarcity, if you will. So automation, robotics, improvements are happening, at hyper speed right now. But we are not at that stage where you are seeing mass replacement of human labor force. Services integration of AI is probably running at a faster pace, but it's not going to be on its own important because services are not a major source of employment. So it has to come through manufacturing to make a real big dent into that productivity gain. So early days, yes, for sure there's going to be productivity gain, but then there are other macro implications of widespread AI and automation. First one is fiscal perspective. Who's going to pay the taxes? Right, because capital is taxed at much lower rates than labor income, and we are getting these trends at a time when public debt to GDP ratios are at all-time high levels, especially in the developed world. And then if you have another hit on taxation revenue, how does that play out? So there are issues associated with replacing physical labor with AI and automation as well, because they are taxed differently, unless the tax code changes, which ultimately I think it will have to. It will potentially can make the fiscal problem worse rather than better.
We know that in sort of previous periods of technological advance, when you have these sort of revolutionary eras, wealth tends to be sort of concentrated in sort of smaller segments of society. Is that a risk that you see occurring potentially with the dawn of AI and with some of those changes that you've already cited?
With the current taxation system, yeah, it will add to more inequality because the capital owners accrue the rent of that technology. Inequality is already quite high, if not at all-time high levels, near all-time high levels. Labor share of GDP or labor income share of GDP is a very depressed level, while capital share of GDP has shot up, especially as services sectors have become more dominant in driving GDP. So if taxation codes are not changed, yes, they will add to those inequality issues, and that will have political and social issues, and we are seeing that and we're living through that. So it will actually get worse. So you may start getting sharp political moves, and I think UK is a good example of that. Between far left and far right, and that and inequality can be one of the channels through which it happens.
Let's turn to monetary policy. You've argued for some time that the neutral rate, the level of interest rate consistent with stable growth, will run higher than in the past. The Fed now seems to agree with you. So does the demographic squeeze reinforce that view?
We think it does, especially when you are seeing coordinated aging across the various advanced economies, and also sharp reduction in immigration. Please remember that immigration slowdown, especially in the US after the new administration came through, is drastic. Far more drastic than AI would be able to catch up with, or automation or robotics will catch up with. Unless in the next couple of 2-3 years, AI is everywhere and automation is robotics everywhere, which I'm not saying that trend is not coming through, but it's very difficult to see that overwhelming the crackdown or zero immigration over the next 2 to 3 years. So we are likely to see labor scarcity. We are likely to see wage growth getting upside pressure as a result of that, and that adds to that inflation dynamic. And then we think that means that the neutral rates will be higher.
So more inflation potentially in the system. Now, of course, that can help to erode past debt, but it also makes borrowing for governments trickier. There is a demand angle here, though, as well, isn't there? Because more retirees, more pensioners looking for safe income will want to buy up that government debt. So that should make it easier for governments to borrow?
You should see demand for fixed income rise as you do see retirement flow increase, or the flow of retirees coming into the system. But it's not as simple as that, in the sense there are many other forces at play. We are also at a time when governments across the world want to spend money.
Yeah.
I mean, US fiscal deficit in any scenario you run is going to be around 6%. Now, that's a very high fiscal deficit outside of war years. The flow of demand from retirees is still a slower moving dynamic versus the supply side.
Now, Japan's current debt stands at sort of 250% of GDP. Do you see other economies going down that road to that sort of level? Is there any sort of peak borrowing you can envisage in the future?
We are hitting some of the limits of those peak borrowings. We see that in the UK. I think we are at peak borrowing. The market doesn't let the UK borrow any more than in terms of the target base. So there's a lot of punishment if there's slippage, even small slippage. So it's a big change from the QE world. So central banks are no longer active in the bond market, and for the UK at least, it has been a big change, especially given the recent political history as well. I think again it varies by country in terms of how much they can push the envelope forward. The rule of thumb is that if you have a reserve currency, you should have more headroom than if you don't have a reserve currency. Our thinking is that you are going to see reduction in savings, even though the asset allocation mix changes towards fixed income, but the net saving pool will shrink. And that means that you will basically have to pay higher interest rates to attract those savings and those investments. Risk taking and the behavioral side also changes, right? Risk taking profile when you are at 65 versus when you are 35 is very different.
Even when you've got that longer period of life expectancy in front of you.
I think, of course, there's also learning by doing. People look at their previous generations and start to put their calibration of their consumption through those lens. But of course, I understand that as longevity becomes much more acknowledged and accepted, that may start to change. But that's still a slower moving behavior because there's a lot of past history shaping your views. The second point I want to mention is that to live longer, you need to be able to spend money on medical care as well. So there is a consumption crowding out happens because you will have to keep part of your savings available for medical care, which means that you have less to spend on it. All other things. So the composition of the consumption basket also changes, and more deterioration in public-driven or public-produced health services happens. I think more pressure you will get on private consumption to make up the shortfall.
I wanted to sort of just broaden this out a bit. We've been focusing quite a lot on sort of Western societies, developed economies. How do you see this impacting emerging economies? And are there any lessons, do you think, that they will be perhaps watching for, learning at the moment? And how will that influence their future past as well?
So I think apart from China, the rest of the EM mostly is young and growing. China has the same issues like developed markets, but at a much lower per capita income. And you're seeing deflation in China and partly contributed by population dynamics. Of course, there's a lot of excess capacity in the industrial sector as well. And that is by policy choice rather than anything else. For the rest of the EM world, population growth is likely to increase. You will have very different set of countries at the top of the of the table by 2050. Superpowers tend to be relatively young and have critical mass of populations. But then technology is very different now. So you can clearly paint a positive picture and then also a negative picture but the imbalances are going to be very extreme. Ultimately, they say demographics is destiny.
So just to sort of wrap things up then, perhaps if you could just close with a picture of the future, what the end game, if we can ever sort of assume such a thing, might be here. Where do you see sort of the global economy as a result of these shifting demographics in the sort of next 40, 50, 60 years plus?
40, 50 years. I think there are multiple mega trends in play, and obviously demographics is clearly one of them. It is going to become more important, as we have been discussing, because of the wider application of AI and automation, robotics, and immigration policy changes. But then you have other mega trends of climate change, resource allocation, resource availability will also get affected at a time when populations are still growing. All those mega forces will have to come into play. That has political implications, social implications. The positive side is technologies, in the history of mankind, technology has been our, get out of jail card. I would not bet against human ingenuity. But on the other side is that the current systems are not ready for such a significant change in the composition of the population, which brings with it change in saving behavior, investment behavior, consumption behavior, and then of course, how are we going to pay for the debt which has been accumulated so far, which is historical spending financed by debt. And then the two things I would highlight from a more individual perspective is, of course, when you're thinking about your savings, you have to think about the provision of healthcare. Will governments be able to fulfill the promises they have been making so far? I think it's going to be important. The second one is that autopilot, that savings and investment programs have to be rethought, because the underlying assumptions are changing and will potentially keep changing, because retirement age are going to change. They are going to get increased. So I don't expect to stop working till I'm 70. So just as a reference point.
Well, thank you, Salman. It's a fascinating picture that you've painted for us today.
Cheers. Thank you.
And you can hear more about longevity on this month's Fidelity Answers podcast as we dig deeper into the investment implications and the opportunities for investors. You can also read more on fidelityinternational.com or on your local Fidelity website. The producers are Patrick Graham, Charlie Humphreys, and Rachel Reed, with production support from Connor Bailey. From all of us at Fidelity, goodbye.